Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. Younger generation music fans probably know of Van Morrison as that cranky old baby boomer era rock star who, back in the coronavirus pandemic era, ranted and raved against vaccinations and social distancing measures, ridiculously comparing it all to slavery. He even made a couple of quote-unquote social protest albums, one of them a collaboration with Eric Clapton, that were completely misguided and tone-deaf in their intention. It was easy to write Morrison off as an old, misinformed, out-of-touch rich guy who just needed to fuck off. However, last year, Morrison gave a revealing interview where he confessed that the pandemic years and his emotional response to them at the beginning of this decade were an especially hard time for him as he struggled with deep depression and mental health issues that required intense psychotherapy. It doesn't totally excuse his ignorance at the time, but it does provide a context for understanding. In addition, his album from 2025, Remembering Now, earned rave critical reviews and was his most generally well-received record in years. To top it all off, Cameron Winter, the leader of Geese, America's hottest and hippest rock band of the current moment, has been very open about how influenced he's been by Morrison's music, particularly his 1968 masterpiece, Astral Weeks. In this current wave of both critical and artistic resurgence, it makes sense to take a look back at Morrison's discography and show some real appreciation, especially for his late 1960s, early 1970s period that's generally recognized as containing his greatest work. Various artists throughout the years have tried to blend blues, country, folk, jazz, R&B, and soul in their own way. However, very few, if any, have done so with Morrison's vision, originality, emotional depth, and more importantly, startlingly brilliant songwriting that has stood the test of time in such a sublime and wonderful way. Yes, he can be a cranky, bitter, moody dickhead. But let's be honest, artistic genius rarely, if ever, comes in perfect human packages. Morrison is certainly a testament to that, and his best music more than makes up for his personality flaws so as to make them moot. So, let's breathe in that air of Celtic soul as we bring you Van Morrison, 1968 to 74, A Legacy. And welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
This will be fun because we've wanted to talk about Van. And we wanted to do a Van episode for a while, but here we are in 2026, and the opportunity has finally presented itself to go over that brilliant streak of Van albums. Yeah, looking forward to this.
Yeah, he's still alive and kicking, and he's still making music. And like I mentioned in the prior setter, his album of last year got good reviews.
Yeah.
It was best reviews in years. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, 80-year-old Van is staying relevant. So
a good record, too. I don't think it's as great as the British made it out to be, but it is pretty good.
Yeah, I was going to say, and he's made a little bit of a comeback from anti-vax lunacy. So Good for him. Yeah. Good for him. Before we do that, let us focus on the here and the now, or at least sort of now, by crossing over into our favorite world, the Parallel Universe, where rock and roll is still awesome and it never went the way of jazz. And yeah, like bands in their 20s are filling stadiums, and there's such a thing as independent rock radio outside of KEXP. and my personal favorite all-time rock station, The Peak, in White Plains, New York, in Westchester County, New York. Awesome station. Like I said, we're not inundated with Olivia Rodrigo and phony Taylor Swifts in the Parallel Universe. We have bands that rock. And so that's a fancy way of saying that this is the segment of the show where we cover new and newish artists that we think that in a more just and fair world would be huge front burner stars. And we have a rare occasion here, at least from my point of view. We're covering the 2 best albums that I've heard so far in 2026. And so that's a pretty good, rare opportunity. With that said, who are you covering in this episode's edition of the Parallel Universe, Art?
Yeah, the Australian indie alternative rock artist Courtney Barnett has been a favorite of this podcast for many years, and 5 years elapsed between her previous album, 2021's Things Take Time, and her recent release of this year, Creature of Habit. Much has changed in Barnett's life since we last heard from her. She shut down the independent record label she started, Milk Records, which released her music as well as a slew of Australian music by a slew of Australian artists. More significantly, she relocated from her native Melbourne, Australia, to the greater Los Angeles area in the US. If the overarching lyrical theme of her previous album was stasis and the feeling of being stuck, the overarching lyrical theme of Creature of Habit is the liberating sense of change and turning over new corners in life. The album kicks off with a great 1-2 punch in the angular, wired, post-punk rocker Stay in Your Lane and the sweetly melodic sway of Wonder, a song that proves Barnett's mastery of mid-tempo, hooky groove rockers. I say this because the 2 songs that were chosen as singles, One Thing at a Time and the Waxahachie collaboration Sight Unseen, are actually 2 of the worst songs on the album. So memorable melodies and pretty banal, simplistic lyrics, or unmemorable melodies, which they have, which is considerable coming from a songwriter of Barnett's caliber. However, it's the second half of the album where the songs and the music really take off. Mantis is the kind of churning, meditative jam that Kurt Weill is known for. Sugar Plum and Another Beautiful Day are shamelessly beautiful pop songs, while Same and Great Advice chug along with some killer guitar work from Barnett. Overall, it's a bit of a musical regression for Barnett, considering the explorations into electronic beats and textures that she delved into on Things Take Time. Nevertheless, a simply good Courtney Barnett album is better than what most bands can muster on their best day. A solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. Chris?
Yeah, I actually think I like this album a little bit more than you do, actually. I think this is a great album, and we have to put things in context here. If we're talking about the world in general and the universe of rock and roll in 2026, then yeah, so far, this right now is a candidate to land in my top 10 albums of the year for this year. Yeah, in terms of her own discography, yeah, there's a little bit of drop off. Nothing will be as good as she was in 2015. That was one of the best albums of the 2010s. But here, I think there's a really strong record with strong lyrically and strong melodically. And yeah, she doesn't pour on the guitar as much as I would, because she is one of the best guitarists of her generation. But when she does whip it out, there's Another Beautiful Day's got a great solo. One Day at a Time. I know you don't like that song, but it's got a kick-ass solo.
One Thing at a Time.
One Thing at a Time.
So solo at the end of that song is terrific. It's just the song.
It's like the best solo on the record. Yeah, and again, but I think it's really consistently strong. I don't think there's a bad song on the record. To me, yeah, the Waxahachie duet is a little twee, a little light, and it's a little weird to hear Courtney Barnett doing an impression of Waxahachie, but it's a good song. So there's that. And so to me, there's a growth here in the sense that as she's gotten older, she's less acerbic and I think a little bit more mature. I think she balances an anxiety with an optimism here. The theme of going through change and surviving change is really compelling. One thing to note, a couple things to note. One, this is really terrific production job on this. This is, I think, I want to say her second, maybe her third, but I think her second collaboration with drummer Stella Mosgawa from Warpaint. And her drumming and her production are both terrific on this album. And so it just sounds great. And the guitar sound, even though she doesn't employ it as much as I would like, just there's a gnarliness to the guitar sound on this record that I really love. One thing to note as well, that last week, the Seattle station, the great independent Seattle station, KEXP, uploaded a recent studio performance of 4 of the songs from this album by Barnett and her band. And surprisingly, mostly Patient and Mantis really benefit from the live treatment, proving sometimes less is more. And so I would encourage everybody to check that out. Yeah, Barnett is one of the more essential artists. She's a Parallel Universe all-star for sure. So there. Now, speaking of KEXP, this makes a good transition to who I'll be talking about. So back in February, KEXP, they uploaded a performance. They caught up with this band in France. I guess they were there for a festival and did a studio session with them, and it pretty much made them darlings and cult favorites. And thankfully, because that's how they ended up on my radar. And
where they really broke through was in YouTube. They're right now a viral YouTube sensation. That's what broke them. YouTube and a little bit of TikTok.
Yep. Yeah, there's that. Yeah. And so, yeah, they had virality, but it was the KEXP thing that really kicked it up to another gear. And so we're talking about a duo from Quebec named Angine de Poitrine, which is basically French for pectoral angina, which is funny. So these guys, Angine de Poitrine, probably Arturo and I's newest favorite band. And so I'm going to be talking about their first 2 albums, the band itself, but also their first 2 albums, Volume 1 from 2024 and the just released earlier this month, Volume 2. Hey, at least they're consistent. Let's talk about this band, which to me is one of the best bands in the world already out of the gate. It's a rare thing indeed here in the 2020s for me to fall in love with a rock band. And yet, here for the second time in less than 8 months, I've done just that. Faithful listeners of our Curmudgeon Rock Report know that I've been fawning over the Brooklyn band Geese for a while now. They now have company upon my most glorious of perches. Meet Angine de Poitrine, 2 30-something natives of Quebec who together comprise the wackiest band to hit the indie scene in a long time. And I say wackiest as a true term of endearment, because these dudes are wholly singular and truly thrillingly unconventional. Here's how I can shorthand what Angine de Poitrine does. Microtonal hippie math rock. Long version. Guitarist Kin de Poitrine, and he spells Kin K-H-N, and drummer Clec de Poitrine, as they goofily refer to themselves as, perform their odd, cool, and at times bordering on unhinged compositions live while donning giant paper mache and polka-dotted tribal masks and polka-dotted costumes. All the while, they speak via weird alien filters and seem to worship triangles. In a way, that makes them the GOAT of Canada. GOAT is in the European collective that Arturo and I both love. As Angine de Poitrine's eclecticism comes with its own screwball mythology. As they perform, Kin de Poitrine creates live loops of his rhythm guitar and bass parts, and once the backdrop is in place, he then proceeds to jam the fuck out on his custom-built oversized double-neck guitar, top half guitar, bottom half bass, which comes equipped with microtonal frets and specified tunings to help him get his Middle Eastern-flavored groove on. The duo gained an instant cult following back in February when KEXP uploaded a performance of a festival in France, inspiring such fun user comments as, quote, "When they announce a world tour, I hope they clarify which world." So how to describe the music that Kin and Clec perform together? The influences are myriad and dizzying. Essentially, they compose and perform 5 to 6 minute long instrumentals that indulge in weird time signatures but manage to conjure up deliciously slinky, absorbing grooves and cool-ass riffage, some of which are actually danceable, or is actually danceable, or at least trippable in a techno-like environment. Now, here's a list of touch points that I personally hear, and this is like one of the weirdest lists you'll ever hear, and maybe most fun lists, so I'll recite this. Lightning Bolt, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, 1960s Turkish psychedelic rock, Tom Verlaine, Jerry Garcia, King Crimson, Frank Zappa, Trey Anastasio, Pantera, Mudvayne, System of a Down, The Chemical Brothers, Stuart Copeland of The Police, Manchester Dance Rock, Speed Metal, Acid House, klezmer, Nugget-style garage fuzz, West African blues, and avant-garde electro jazz. All well and good. But what about the albums? Yes, they are fantastic. So far, Angine de Poitrine have released 2 records, 2024's Volume 1 and this year's Volume 2. Both contain 6 songs. The first album runs 32 minutes long, and the second one is 36 minutes long. Power pop brevity is not the thing here, man. Let's take these one by one. First, Volume 1. Awesome album. Stone Cold classic. Here, Ken and Clark repeatedly introduce cool-as-hell rhythmic backbones and then ride them deliciously, extracting every ounce of excitement they can out of them. Album opener Sherpa launches with an agile riff, a drum punch, and an electronic warble, all of which evoke both the Beastie Boys' Sabotage and King Gizzard's Rattlesnake. From there, Ken restlessly jams away with speed metal-worthy shredding, and in the middle of the album comes the awesomely groove-tastic doubling of Tambij and Ababa Hotel, on which these guys prove their indeed inherence of both 70s proggy rhythm and 70s guitar gods. On the former, Ken makes like Tom Verlaine and rides an exotically trance-inducing fuzz bass line with a sublime solo. Then the duo flips the script a little on the latter, and perhaps accidentally, and perhaps not accidentally, evoke the Dead's Disco Nugget Shakedown Street, with things getting delightfully four-on-the-floor hip-shaking and Ken finding the space to noodle like Garcia the shaman himself. The album ends with La Abarek, a hard-hitting piece of Turkish-style dance rock hypnosis that could serve as a rock god Snake Charmer's theme music. The whole of Volume 1 is a relentlessly unified musical vision in which the songs flow seamlessly from one to the next, as if they were 6 movements in a music school-worthy, classically structured suite. The album is bold, and it's brilliant. Volume 2, which was released again about 2 weeks ago, is a wilder, funkier, riskier, and ultimately messier affair. Still awesome, still jaw-dropping at times, still undeniably ambitious, but here Angine de Poitrine do cross the line a little bit into indulgence and are at times a little too clever for their own good. There are nevertheless some gems on here. Mata Zyklek starts with a series of stuttering staccato riffs that are chased with some angular and grease lightning riffage from Ken, eventually serving as a rhythmic magic carpet for Ken to solo away with distinct Turkish smoke and flavor, even when they change up the riff 2/3 of the way through. The duo maintain its sweat equity and juice. Sarnes starts with a slow-burning, bass-heavy, jazz-like guitar groove that slithers along quirkily yet elegantly before launching into an extended jam that feels like it was inspired by the rocked-out bridge to The Police's Driven to Tears. And then here's a 3-word take on UTZP, which is spelled UTZP. Klezmer on acid. The microtonality in Ken's guitar tones here ring loud and true and crystal clear. This is gypsy parade music for prog metalheads, especially when the jam stops on a dime and then picks up at about 3 times the tempo. Ken again channels Tom Verlaine here. Really cool stuff. Ultimately, though, the loss of discipline in maintaining a single groove and riff and groove for an entire song is what drags this record down a little bit to merely a 4-star album. To me, the emphasis on flow that defines Volume 1 is lacking a little bit here. No matter, though, Angine de Poitrine seems destined to be one of this generation's most storied jam bands, one whose fan base I can't wait to witness develop organically. Seriously, their audiences are going to be a nerd con of the highest order. Love these guys. Arturo?
Yeah, I totally disagree with you between Volume 2 and Volume 1, but for opposite reasons. Volume 2 is not a math rock album like the first one is. Volume 2 has more of a funk element and is more of a groove-based record. And I think the grooves do sustain themselves throughout this whole record, much more so than they do on the first one, especially on the next to last track called Angor, which is basically a blues album. Sorry, a blues track.
Yeah, I do. I just listened to that before we went on the air again, and I was like, Arturo had a point.
It's a Tenariwen style West African blues track, basically. Fabian for the first track, that's funk. That's a funk song.
Yeah.
Okay. And Sarniez is a funk song too.
Yeah, Sarniez is definitely funk. Yeah.
So this whole album is more of a funk based element. To me, they've abandoned the math rock, and in my opinion, they're better off for it. And that's why I think this album, the first album is great, mind you. I think it's a fantastic record. If I had to redo my top 10 of 2024, that album, Volume 1, would probably be my number 7 or number 8. But this album, I think, is better because of that funk and blues element, because it's more of a groove-based record. To me, that makes it better. I'll take groove over math rock any day of the week. I think this album is more cohesive than Volume 1.
I think you're underselling. I'm more of a math rock guy than you are in general, but I think you're underselling the grooviness of Volume 1. There's some really great stuff in the middle of that record.
But this one grooves more. This one, they accentuate the grooves more, and they tone down the overly complex math rocky weirdo bonkers shit. And
I will say
it's a little less complex. And another thing about Volume 2 that I like more, there's more air. There's more space in the arrangements than in Volume 1, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with you on that. I think that they're both pretty spacey. This one, it's a little bit of a different record because, like you said, like Angor is its own category. I mean, that just clicked for me before we went on the air, and I have a feeling I'm going to end up obsessed with that song. But
I also think this album is produced a little bit better. It's got more of a crisp,
I agree.
It's got more of a crisp production.
No, some of the things you're saying, and also the bass stuff on this is a little bit better. Yeah, the fuzziness here is more pronounced. But I just think that to me, Volume 1, it's more adventurous, but it's more seamless, and it just flows better. And I really think that some of the stuff just gets extraordinary, like those middle songs that I mentioned, where he channels both Verlaine and Garcia in the middle of doing Turkish microtonal music. To me, that's just extraordinary. And they do lock in. I think that I guess you could say that one of the reasons I like Volume 1 a little bit more is that it's a jammier record. And it just, to me, that just pulls me in.
They do more improvisations on Volume 1 than on Volume 2. But then again, that's why I like Volume 2 more, because they stay on the groove more.
Yeah, but at the same time,
they tone down the wonkiness. The wonkiness is great in Volume 1, but they tone it down a little bit in Volume 2, and it's more of a lean machine, which is what I like to hear.
Yeah, but the other thing, and again, like I mentioned, there are a couple like Fabian, which is cool. Again, they're both like really strong albums, so don't get me wrong. But in Fabian, it happens. It happens in Madazilek, and it happens, I think, in at least one other place. There's one of these songs that happens twice where they change riffs, where the songs they have sections, and so to me, that's a little bit more of an indulgent touch there, where they don't seem quite as disciplined in there. And maybe you chalk that up to being more adventurous in trying to basically change up.
But they change it up, but the transition is seamless, though. It makes sense. It's not transitioning and changing just for complexity's sake, like a lot of prog rock bands.
No, yeah, exactly.
It makes sense when they do it.
Yeah, like the change up in Madaziklik just works really well. And then I love Ups, just the idea of making gypsy music. It's the slow burner for the first half, and then it like stops, silent for 3 seconds. And then, hey, it's Polka Party USA, and it just really
I love
the
second. I love the second half of that song. My only knock on the record. You're thinking gypsy. The first half, it's a country music riff, really. The first half of that song. It's a very country music riff.
I hear klezmer, but then again, country music is actually inspired a little bit. It's like hillbilly polka in some ways, like the Western swing stuff is like hillbilly polka. I guess that's where we're coming from. And then to me, the really cool thing about both albums is they both have one song that makes me think of Pantera, which is and that kind of prog metal weirdness, almost like it's down tuning without down tuning. So they're a fascinating band. And the guitar, it's really funny. This custom job where again, it's double necked, but the top neck is the guitar and the bottom neck is the bass. and it's exaggeratedly large in large part because they're wearing those giant, ridiculous masks.
Yeah.
Dude has to be able to see what he's doing. And then their live performance, like the KXP thing blows me away. One, because of the sound engineering, that station just employs like top-notch engineers. But watching Ken do the live looping and how like fluid it is and how he's able to set all that stuff up, and he changes it up back and forth. It's not set the drum machine or set the metronome and then jam away. He's changing things up as he goes along. And so he'll do one part and then he'll loop that in, he'll pedal it in and then move on to the next one and then pedal that in and go back. And it's just really neat to see how they work. If they come through Houston, honestly, I hate to admit it, but I've seen one show. I've paid for one show in the last 18 years, and that was a Brad Paisley show a couple years back at the Houston Rodeo. By the way, that guy kicks ass. But I might drop a few bucks. I'm not going to pay $1,100 on the secondary market, but I might drop a few bucks to go see Angine de Poitrine if they come here through Houston.
Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
Van the Man Morrison. Like I said at the top we've been wanting to do an exploration of Van Morrison for a while, for a lot of reasons. One of the more singularly fascinating artists in rock and roll and popular music history, for a lot of reasons. And again, when he first came along, or when he first kicked off his solo career, the first couple albums, the critical consensus was not where it is now. It was really mixed. A lot of folks that thought that a lot of what he was doing was dull and samey and a little too folky or a little too cerebral. For basically, folks were into the acid rock, and the young critics were there and didn't really get it. But there were two guys that actually did get Van from the very start, and I'm going to be quoting both of them at length in this episode. There's Lester Bangs and Greil Marcus, two of the best rock critics and beautiful writers that have ever covered rock and roll. And so we're going to start with Lester Bangs, and he gives a beautiful overview of what Morrison meant and what he, at his essence, accomplished in his music when he was at his best. And this Bangs quote comes from a retrospective essay on Astral Weeks that he published in 1979. Quote, Van Morrison is interested, obsessed with how much musical or verbal information he can compress into a small space, and almost conversely, how far he can spread one note, word, sound, or picture to capture one moment, be it a caress or a twitch. He repeats certain phrases to extremes that from anyone else would seem ridiculous, but he's waiting for a vision to unfold, trying as unobtrusively as possible to nudge it along. Sometimes he gives it to you through silence by choking off the song in mid-flight. It's too late to stop now. It's the great search, fueled by the belief that through these musical and mental processes, illumination is attainable or may at least be glimpsed. When he tries for this, he usually gets it more in the feeling than in the revealed word. Perhaps much of the feeling comes from the reaching, but there's also always the sense of what if he did apprehend that word. There are times when the word seems to hover very near, and then there are times when we realize the word was right next to us, when the most mundane, overused phrases are transformed. I give you love from Madame George. Out of relative silence, the word, snow in San Anselmo. That's where it's at, Van will say, and he means it. Aren't his interviews fascinating? What he doesn't say is that he is inside the snowflake, isolated by the song, and it's almost Independence Day. So there you go. That from Lester Bangs, really capturing. And again, Morrison is one of the more obsessively impressionistic, and just intensely impressionistic singers, especially. More singer than lyricist, but I think he accomplishes both. And so he's truly a fascinating character. And we'll get into what makes him so great as we go through the 8 albums between 1968 and 74 that we're covering. But before we do, Arturo, give us a history, set us up with Van's origin story as a solo performer and how we got to this point.
Yeah, before Van Morrison made his name as one of rock's all-time greatest singers and songwriters, he was part of the seminal Northern Irish garage rock band Them. They first hit big toward the end of 1964 with their cover of the old 1930s blues standard Baby Please Don't Go. However, it was the B-side to that single, Morrison's own Gloria, that has endured as one of the greatest garage rock anthems of all time. They went on to have more success in 1965 with the pop soul of Here Comes the Night, a big worldwide hit. For me, I prefer the bluesy, groovy Mystic Eyes from that same year. In 1966, they kept going strong as a touring band without having any more hits, although I highly recommend the stomping standalone single I Can Only Give You Everything from that year. After their extensive American tour finished, they returned to Belfast, and after a dispute with their manager over money that was owed to them, they broke up. A few months later, the American producer Bert Burns, who worked with Them, convinced Morrison to move to New York and record for Burns' own record label, Bang Records. Morrison flew over and signed a contract that he really didn't read too well or understand, and he would find out the repercussions of this soon after. In March of 1967, Morrison went to the studio for a 2-day session and recorded 8 songs, 4 of which were to be singles and 4 of which were to be B-sides. Little did Morrison know that Bang released all the songs as an album titled Blowin' Your Mind, complete with a cheesy psychedelic design for the album cover that was trendy at the time. If Morrison was pissed off that this was done without his permission or awareness, he would claim that he only found out about it from a friend who bought the record. He nonetheless must have been thrilled when one of the album's tracks, Brown Eyed Girl, exploded onto the charts, becoming a massive worldwide hit and peaking at number 10 on the Billboard Pop chart. If you go on YouTube, you can even find a clip of Morrison lip-syncing the song on Dick Clark's American Bandstand musical variety show. If you think you don't know the song, trust me, you all do.
Yes,
it's one of the most famous pop rock singles of the 1960s and easily one of the greatest songs ever recorded.
And one of the more licensed
commercials galore.
Absolutely.
Needless to say, the contract Morrison signed with Bang Records was a crappy one that gave him very little in the way of money and royalties. It got worse after Burns unexpectedly died later in 1967 when Morrison got in a legal dispute with Burns' wife that prevented him from performing or recording in the New York City area. Morrison then moved to Boston in early 1968 and spent most of the year there performing solo acoustic gigs at whatever clubs he could find that recognized him from his days in Them or as that brown-eyed girl guy. It was during this time that he wrote the songs that would make up the album Astral Weeks. In interviews, Morrison alludes to this time as a really hard one for him. He was broke and, according to him, literally starving. Fortunately, it got around to Joe Smith, the head of Warner Brothers Records, that the former lead singer of Them and the guy who wrote Brown Eyed Girl was playing some spellbinding club shows in Boston and showcasing some incredible new songs. Smith wanted to sign Morrison immediately, but he first had to deal with Morrison still being under a shady and crooked contract with Bang Records. In later years, Smith recounted having to meet some New York City gangsters in an abandoned warehouse on 9th Avenue in Manhattan and give them a whole suitcase full of money to buy Morrison out from out from the Bang contract.
Yeah.
It was a good thing he did, because Morrison would soon go on to produce a stunning body of work that proved both critically and commercially successful, as well as influence legions of artists and musicians. Chris, what say you about the auspicious start to Van Morrison's career?
It says a lot that Burt Burns was so mobbed up that his wife was terrified of everything, even after Burns died.
Yeah.
So, he got into a legal dispute with the wife, but the wife was basically afraid of getting killed if she went along and let Van free. And so the idea of Joe Smith, of all people, showing up with a bucket full of money to these goons. And there's a famous quote. I'm just paraphrasing this, but Smith later said, "Yeah, it was pretty clear these guys weren't in the music business." which is great. But as far as the origin story, it's just hard to believe. A couple of things. One, it's hard to believe, given the richness and the places that Morrison took his solo career and how artistically rich it all was, that this is the guy that did Gloria, which is like the simplest piece of FM radio candy, or AM radio candy imaginable. And then also Brown Eyed Girl, which is a great song, and it portends that he had that ability. But again, it's just a simple garagey recording that had radio bubblegum in mind. And so it just, for him, he showed he could write the hits. Like he could have had a career. He could have written Gloria, and he could have pulled hits out of his ass. Like he could have coasted on that, but he didn't. And then the second thing is, could you imagine walking into a coffee house in early 1968 in Cambridge and hearing Van Morrison workshopping the songs from Astral Weeks? I mean, you imagine being a fly on that fucking wall. That must have just been, that would have been a fascinating experience. It's right up there to me with, we covered a couple years back, we covered Neil Young's archives, and there's a show in the archives from Ontario, an Ontario coffee house from 1966 or 1967, where he's playing all of his early stuff before it broke. And so it would have been the same thing of just imagine being in on that. Van, interesting character, and he only got more interesting as these years go on. And keep in mind, by the way, in 1968, as we start this section, this dude is 21 going on 22.
Yeah.
And so keep that in mind as we talk about these albums.
And the first album we're going to talk about, he was 23 when it came out. And the first of the brilliant run of albums for Van Morrison, Astral Weeks from 1968. There are great albums, and then there are all-time great albums. There are all-time great albums, and then there are all-time great albums that defy categorization or description. Albums that just feel timelessly brilliant and have influenced multiple generations of artists to this day. That's what Astral Weeks is, the one album in Morrison's catalog that he's never been able to match, the one that casts a long shadow over a body of work that already contains an array of stunning songs and albums. On this record, Morrison merged folk, jazz, and a weird kind of Celtic soul, with stream of consciousness lyrics conveyed in deep, beautiful, impressionistic imagery. The result is a new kind of mystic music that to this day, fans, artists, and critics are still trying to decipher. It didn't do that commercially at the time, but it drew rave critical reviews as well as strong word-of-mouth support from within the music industry at the time, maintaining Morrison's support until his huge commercial success a couple of years later. Chris?
Yeah, this is one of the most important rock albums ever recorded, produced, and put out, in the sense that it promoted a sort of artistic freedom and opened up the realm of possibilities as far as what you could do with rock and roll or popular music or whatever you would call it, arrangements. Just a fascinating record. And here, what this album basically is, Morrison and his producer hiring a bunch of jazz session players and giving them the freedom to arrange things as they saw fit to a bunch of Celtic-tinged folk songs.
Yeah.
And so they pretty much on the fly, and they workshopped it, that Van would be in the recording booth with his guitar, and then these guys would be coming up with this on the fly. And you get these arrangements so gorgeous, they're practically surreal. This is extraterrestrial balladry for real. And even the most straightforward thing here on musically, the 12-bar blues structured Cypress Avenue, gets an otherworldliness to it thanks to the harpsichord and strings and flute and bass. The stars on this album are flautist John Payne, and this is before there was Ian Anderson. there was Van introducing the flute as a legit popular music thing. And then bassist Richard Davis. This is one of the great bass albums and one of the most seminal bass albums of all time. It's right up there with There's a Riot Going On and London Calling.
The bass holds the whole record together, really.
Yeah, and Blood Sugar Sex Magic, but it's such an expressionistic. It's not staying in the pocket. It's this he's basically following Van's vocals. And he's following along and just riffing off what Van is doing vocally. And you get these incredible performances, especially on Sweet Thing. That's just the best thing ever. And so, more about this album, just miraculously spiritual stuff. Yeah. And so there's really a theme to this record, which is taking tangible moments and memories and finding and achieving transcendence in them. And so you get the stream of consciousness lyrics that point onward towards the heavens. At least in Astral Weeks, you get this wanting to take a love into literally the celestial realm, where he actually cites in another time, in another place, towards the heavens. And this band and the music actually takes you there and transports you there. Just ridiculously intense. One of the great outros in all of popular music. And again, like they said, they focus on a time and place and then transcend them through meditation and Van's intentional statements to unmoor his scenes from the confines of physics. The other thing about this record is that he walks a fine line between romantic and creepy on this record. It's a meditation on his obsessions and on the intensity of romance and nostalgia and memory. And he makes it clear, by the way, that everything on this album is happening in his head. And he gives that away with this lyric, "And I shall drive my chariot down your streets and cry, it's me, I'm dynamite, and I don't know why. And you shall take me strongly in your arms again. And if I wonder if I might remember that I ever felt the pain." And so the idea is reliving a moment, but meditating on the sweetness rather than the acidity. And that's from Sweet Thing. But then he's got Cypress Avenue, which is about a memory of an ostensibly teenage Van sitting in a car and leering out the window at a 14-year-old girl that he has an intense crush on.
And maybe he was 14 years old at the time himself, so it's not.
Yeah, exactly. But what I was going to say is, it's legitimate to question whether 22 or 23-year-old Van is still lusting after the 14-year-old he gets. You never know there. And then you got Madame George, which may or may not be about a drag queen. But the part of this that matters the most is the genuinely beautiful, but also genuinely unsettling extended outro here, like the second half of the song, where Van can't bring himself to let go of that lost love and the parting and the thoughts about what could have been, or the parting of something that he obsessed over so acutely. There's real grief here, but it borders on a lush brand of lunacy and stalking. So there's that. And let me finish off, again, a lot of notes here in Astral Weeks, but let me finish this off. I mentioned Real Marcus before. This album got mixed reviews. There were some folks that really, in one instance, somebody referred to it as dull and samey, and they weren't really getting it, but Griot did. And a little bit late to the party, but March 1969, Rolling Stone published Griot's review of Astral Weeks, and quoting from that here, quote, "The music is not rock and roll in any ordinary or hyphenated sense. Rather, it is music that is intelligible to us because of rock and roll, intelligible given the complexities which hide behind the simplicity of intent because of John Wesley Harding," which, he actually is an influence on this album. But anyway, what might seem arty at first proves to be a new place to go, a new kind of music to hear, as conductor Larry Fallon often abandons the structured comforts of melody, rhythm, and time in an attempt to create and sustain mood, a basis for Van's own creations. Once Van establishes control of that mood and the music flows toward him rather than forcing him into a conception to which he must adhere, the musicians give Van space in which to walk without abandoning him. Astral Weeks is strong, serious stuff. It's not really for fun the way a good song on the car radio is for fun. Some songs, Brown Eyed Girl for one, are car songs no matter how one hears them. Speed up, pound on the upholstery, dance right here in the car. That can happen anywhere with the right music. Other songs might be different. Once I heard Bob Dylan singing Mr. Tambourine Man on an AM car radio, and I almost ran off the road into a ditch because that song isn't driving music, and I went with it to another place where it belonged. Astral Weeks is serious, and it is also a profoundly intellectual album. Not in the sense that it requires some grand intelligence to quote-unquote understand it or dig it, or in the sense that Van's music is now something to be figured out. Rather, it is intellectual in the same way that Nathaniel Hawthorne's room, filled with moonlight, was a place and a time for the intellect and emotions to live together. Astral Weeks has the same powers as such a room. There you go.
There you go. Grail Marcus. Yeah. Good. That's a pretty powerful review for Astral Weeks. I would love to have heard what he would have said for the next album. And that is the second straight masterpiece Morrison produced, Moondance from 1970. Astral Weeks painted Morrison as a bit of an elusive, mystical, enigmatic figure. That would change with Moondance, a massive commercial hit that capitalized on the artistic momentum generated by Astral Weeks. It's much more accessible in the sense that Morrison absorbs his old school blues, Ray Charles, and Sam Cooke influences to create a new kind of R&B/soul music with songs like Into the Mystic and It Stoned Me, containing some of the most stirring and powerful horn arrangements ever put on record. The downright jazzy swing of the title track elevated it to an instant pop standard that's revered to this day. Never has anyone merged Irish folk music with black R&B the way Morrison did with Everyone and Caravan. Come Running, These Dreams of You, Brand New Day, The Lovely Crazy Love. Morrison was just gushing brilliant soul songs during this period, and Moondance is a note-for-note, top-to-bottom, perfect album. Chris?
Yeah, incredibly perfect, and it's his second perfect album in a row, but perfect for different reasons. This album is the direct result of Astral Weeks bombing commercially.
Yeah.
And Van says to himself, I guess I better make music that can sell records, man. And so he turns around, and here comes Moondance, which to me is the best blue-eyed soul album ever made. Yeah. To me, I've always considered From Elvis and Memphis to be blue-eyed soul in a way, that it has a little bit of a mainstream country lacquer in the production, but it's really like a soul performance by Elvis. But here, Van greatly surpasses that. It's just one rapturous, wistful, wide-eyed, and exhilarating and perfect soul composition and lyrical accomplishment after another. To me, I love Caravan. Caravan is objectively Van's best song. And like you said, it has this wonderful melding of Irish folk and Jackie Wilson and Sam Cooke, and it just wonderful, just beautiful structure. The verses, which are so evocative and looking at and romanticizing the gypsy life, and then getting to that hook, to getting to that chorus. It's like one of the great wordless choruses of all time. And then that bridge with that horn punch, and just over and over again on the chorus, and just wonderful song. Again, just my favorite Van song. There's just something about that just makes my jaw drop every time I hear it, especially through headphones. It's a great headphone song. I would describe the album really as tender bravado by candlelight because it's so utterly fucking romantic. And like you mentioned, the horn arrangements here, to me, Morrison encouraged horn arrangements and used horn arrangements better than anyone outside of James Brown and Stax Volt. Really textured with lots of feelings. Yeah, lots of feeling. You mentioned And It Stoned Me, which has great punctuation throughout with the horns. But to me, the best horn stuff on this record is the title track. There's just Moondance is just incredible the way it uses the horns, because it shows up in a really subtle but powerful way on the chorus. because generally speaking, on the verses, which have this really great sort of performative jazz lilt, it's defined by the piano and the bass and the flute. But then you get to the chorus and you get these horns that come in that just really just give it a texture and a bite. And then it gets into the solo section, and here comes Jack Schroer, who is one of Van's secret weapons, coming in with this really killer little sax solo too. And it's just so rich and so gorgeous. And again, the whole album is just perfect. Just one rousing song after another. All of side A is still in heavy rotation in like older people classic rock. The classic rock has been divided into folks, classic rock for guys our age, which means they play a lot of fucking Def Leppard, and then older folks. And so for the older folk classic rock, the whole of side A is in heavy rotation, which is a pretty neat accomplishment.
The next one, his band and the street choir from 1970. Van Morrison had this superpower where he could effortlessly assimilate black music into something that was totally his own, while also still sounding like authentic black music. Calling this Moondance Part 2 or the leftovers of Moondance is reductive and insulting.
Yeah,
this
it really
is a brilliant album in its own right and suffers only in comparison to the previous two masterpieces. Domino is a pulsating, rocking R&B number that proved to be one of his biggest hits.
Call Me Up. Yeah.
Call Me Up in Dreamland is the best song Fats Domino never wrote, and pumped up with those vintage, beautiful, by now patented Morrison horn arrangements. Give Me a Kiss and Blue Money are perfections of jaunty soul. I've Been Working is a badass jam, while If I Ever Needed Someone is a profoundly moving, searing ballad that sees Morrison either addressing a romantic love or God himself. He even breaks out a beautiful falsetto in the stirring Gypsy Queen, a wonderful album and perhaps one of his most underrated records. Chris?
Yeah, it's underrated only in the sense of, like you said, it's the third record in this streak, and it ain't as good as the first two. But then again, almost nothing is. Yeah. Both of those albums probably belong in the top 50 albums ever made by anybody. But this album is really strong, and it's a tale of two halves. This is the first of two albums in this streak that I'm defining as a tale of two halves. The first 7 songs here are really, they're light, they're fun, they're punchy, they're poppy. You know, Blue Monday is a sing-along bop. Domino was his biggest hit, which is top 10 hit, but it has just really great hookiness to it and really great vocal layering to it as well. And here, like, Jack Schroer is really the star of the show. This is his album. Like the sax solos, it hit the sax notes on the little sax bridge on Domino is really fantastic. And he has some solos on here that are just the killer. So that's the first 7 songs. And then he veers towards tender soul ballads from there, and just more soul, like kind of like songwriter songs. Like Virgo Clowns is just really beautiful song about uplifting a friend. And even there on that song, Jack Schroer has a baritone sax line that lurks underneath everything. Gypsy Queen is hopelessly romantic. Like you said, just beautiful song. And then the album closer is gorgeous too, Street Choir. Yeah. And it has the best horn arrangement, I think, on the entire album, and one of the best horn arrangements in the entire Van catalog. And also, like, really great backup vocals too, because from what I've read, the original concept of this record, the reason it's called His Band and the Street Choir, which wasn't his name, by the way. I think he was originally going to call it Virgo Clowns or something like that. But the concept originally, he wanted to do it all a cappella. He wanted to do an all a cappella take on these songs. But then he abandoned that concept when he figured it wouldn't really work. But I can imagine, like, Street Choir would be like the one song that might actually work as all a cappella. Yeah. So again, it's a weird shift. You get past the first 7 songs and then you get to the second half, but it works. And so, yeah, strong album.
Next, Tupelo Honey from 1971. The centerpiece of this album is the amazing, rousing, powerful ballad that is the title track. Quite simply, it's one of the most beautiful soul ballads ever written by anyone, and it displays Morrison's gift for taking simple sentiment and exploding it into cosmic meaning and affinity that he shared with John Lennon. But there are other great tracks here, proving how in the zone Morrison was at this time. Wild Night is a blistering rocker, earning Morrison another huge chart hit that would later be covered in 1994 by John Mellencamp and Michelle Ndigiocello. This album has a more pastoral, folky feel than his previous efforts so far, with plaintive tracks like Old Woodstock, Starting a New Life, and Straight to Your Heart Like a Cannonball. The album ends with the rhythm-shifting R&B stomper Moonshine Whiskey. It's another very strong entry in this streak of Morrison's catalog. Chris?
Yeah, to me, this album is really uneven. The great stuff is amazing. Like you said, Wild Night is just a really great little soul pop number. Old Woodstock, I love. That's just a really nice, like, folk ballad. And then, of course, Tupelo Honey is one of the best songs ever written. And it's just an extraordinarily romantic and rapturous. That's a positively rapturous song. And a funny story on that is, so my friend Stu, you remember Stu from college, he comes to me in 2006. He's about to get married, and he wants to consult with me on first dance songs. And I gave him a few. And one of the ones I mentioned was Tupelo Honey. Yeah. And he takes that to his wife, Dawn. And Dawn's, I want to walk down the aisle of that song. Mm. He said that's such a transcendent, lovely thing, because they got married on a nature preserve in Princeton, New Jersey. Right. And so for that kind of pastoral, kind of universal song, miracle song like that, it was a perfect choice to walk down the aisle. And so I get to take credit for putting that idea in her head. And of course, the funny part is they ended up dancing to Waste by Fish. So again, hey, that was a lost cause. But so like I said, the great stuff is great. The not so great stuff is really not so great. This is Van. You always know, like, basically the rest of the album is about how seemingly happily married he is, or how it's about happy marriage. And You're My Woman is just corny. And
that's probably the worst song on the album.
And it's a little bit insufferable. I'm not a huge fan of Moonlight Whiskey either. I think that's a little overwrought as well. But then the rest of it, he just has these country ditties about, he had just moved to Marin County, California. So it's, hey, I'm out here in the country and I'm loving nature and all this. And so it gets hokey and kind of corny, and it's decent. Like I said, it's Van, so it's not bad. But it's really just compared to, again, the highlights of this album. And so it's hit or miss for me. But but the stuff that hits is astonishing.
On this episode, we celebrated the peak years of Van Morrison. For the next episode, we're going back to our ongoing series, The Saga of Grunge. The year 1989 saw Seattle's grunge scene get serious attention from the American underground music press, but it was the mainstream music press from the UK that really keyed into grunge, making it a minor sensation over there and opening the door for its eventual popularity a couple of years later. Mudhoney released their full-length debut album, Soundgarden put out their major label debut, and a little band from the small logging town of Aberdeen, Washington named Nirvana released their first album. Other seminal Seattle bands like Screaming Trees, Mother Love Bone, and Tad put out some grunge goodness, while grunge-adjacent bands like the Pixies and the Jesus Lizard also made some noise. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you The Saga of Grunge, Part 3, 1989. Well, the next album in this great streak of Van Morrison's is St. Dominic's Preview from 1972. This is another album in Van Morrison's illustrious catalog that counts, at least to me, as one of his most underrated. The big, high-energy single Jackie Wilson Says is another classic example of assimilating old-school R&B and remaking it into something totally his own. The title track is simply one of his all-time greatest songs, a rambling, in a good way, grooving soul number that hits all the emotional buttons. There's no shortage of Morrison songs bitching about the music industry and the perceived shallowness of certain art scenes, but this one stands out because he transcends his own bitterness with hope and even pleading for togetherness and a better way of living. The shifty time signature on Gypsy would normally be a put-off, but it's a testament to Morrison's exquisite songwriting and conviction of performance that he pulls it off. I Will Be There is a brilliant slice of lounge blues, while the epic 10-minute Almost Independence Day closes the album with a powerful folk jazz soul fusion that evokes Astral Weeks. By this point, Morrison was living on his own planet when it came to original artistry. Chris?
Yeah, Van Morrison has 3 perfect albums. This is the third one to me. I love this album. Just amazing stuff. Certainly has the best growling by a singer on any album ever on halfway through. But to me, it's just a pop soul masterpiece. And it may actually be the best set of vocals that Van ever recorded for an album. And part of this, too, is that he worked for a 3-album streak with the producer Ted Templeman. A lot of you might know that name as the guy that helped break Van Halen. He produced 6 albums for Van Halen.
From Van Morrison to Van Halen.
Yeah, he liked his Vans. But he's a real studio pro, and he really got some really great takes and really captured the resonance of Van's voice. And I think the secret to this album is its simplicity. Jackie Wilson said, just so simple and joyous, and maybe his single best pop song, just a wonder. And then Gypsy is another ball of joy, intense but rollicking take on romancing an actual nomadic gypsy. Almost have to wonder if this album was a big influence on Steely Dan, because Aja is essentially a music school smart boy version of St. Dominic's Preview. It's like same emotional vibe and Wide-Eyed Wonder. A little creepier, yeah, and obviously would hit some of those wonky notes. But to me, there's a lot to be seen here as an origin story for that album. And again, everything on this album is just so simple. Just music is instantly accessible, and the lyrics are just easy breezy, and for the most part, nowhere near the stream of consciousness word blasting of the early albums. Right. Just a brilliantly communicated and translated set of songs. Even the 10-minute long workout songs are simple as hell. The only thing that could pass for complex are the lyrical flourishes and scene painting of St. Dominic's Preview, the song. Probably the closest he had gotten to his Astral Weeks transcendence vibe he had since then. And again, like you pointed out, it's an interesting lyrical concept. It's like him rambling about being stuck at industry parties, but then going out onto the balcony and looking out and seeing hope and seeing wonder and saying that there's definitely more to life than this bullshit. And so that's almost really moving. And then I love Almost Independence Day, which has that Moog line that runs underneath it. And it's just this intense meditation on a night walking along the San Francisco Bay, probably with his wife at the time, even though they were falling apart. Who knows, may have been his girlfriend and soon to be fiance, but and just setting that scene and indulging in that moment. And of course, Almost Independence Day, in a way, it's got a double meaning in the sense of here we are. You can look at it as 2 ways. Either this is our last great moment together before things fall apart because it's almost Independence Day and there goes the marriage and I'm almost free. Or it's him walking around with his new lover while he's in the middle of getting divorced. And it's almost independent. So it's not just the holiday, but he's talking about his own impending independence. And so that's really neat. So yeah, just as Bangs would say, this is a wonderfully Van being stuck in a moment he can't get out of. Okay. So just an extraordinary artistic wheelhouse of his.
All right, next one. Hard Nosed the Highway from 1973. This is a classic case of a 50-50 album. Half of it is crap and sounds like either inferior outtakes of a bad Van Morrison or inferior outtakes or bad Van Morrison impressions. However, the other half is spellbinding and has some of his best songs. The cream of this crop is Warm Love, the scintillating ballad that showcases Morrison's startling romantic vulnerability. The title track is classic Morrison-esque languid soul, while The Great Deception is lyrically a stinging indictment of the hypocrisy and vanity of rock star and Hollywood culture. But when it's delivered with music and singing and vocals that are this sublime, it sounds like powerful gospel music. The good half is good enough to make this album a must-have in this wonderful album streak. Chris?
Yeah, to me, this is 3 good songs and a bunch of dull crap. We said earlier that Van could have spent his career pulling hits out of his ass. and could have like kind of half-assed his way to superstardom. Warm Love is that's exactly what he's doing. He's pulling out a wonderful pop song out of his ass. There's the cover of Being Green, which was made famous later by Kermit the Frog, who had the best version of it, by the way, because he turned it into it just really touching vocal performance by Jim Henson in capturing this idea of being different. And basically, it ain't easy being green. The other, basically being different than everybody, and as an intention, as a statement. In Van's hand, it becomes a statement of defiance. And it's really fun take on it. It's different than Kermit's. Kermit's is just moving. And for outcasts like us, it's a wonderful take. But in Van's hand, again, it's defiant liberation. And then I do like Streets of Anselmo, or St.
Anselmo.
I'm getting that. Yeah, Streets of Anselmo.
Not St. Elmo's Fire, Chris.
Yeah. St. Elmo's Fire. No. But yeah, Streets of Anselmo, just really, really nice and lyrical picture. He tries to paint like nature pictures all through this album, and this is the only one that works. Autumn Song is terrible, or as Charles Barkley would say, terrible. They're just awful. And so this is like Van, and again, he's going through some tumult in his personal life, and he's a little bit burned out, I think, at this point. And it was after this, he does the tour, which invigorates him a little bit, and then he goes on vacation, and then so we go out in fine form. Speaking of which, let's talk about those two records.
Yeah. The next one is a double live album. It's Too Late to Stop Now, released in early 1974, recorded in 1973. To support Hard Nose the Highway, Morrison embarked on a huge tour in the middle of 73. This official double live album is culled from 3 performances at the Rainbow Theater in London, the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium in Santa Monica, California, and the legendary nightclub The Troubadour in Los Angeles. With an 11-piece band called the Caledonia Soul Orchestra, complete with a horn and string section, Morrison produces an overpowering live document of an artist at the peak of his powers. The sound is big, spacious, and crisp. It was critically revered at the time of its release and is still considered one of the greatest live albums of all time. Chris, do you know who else loves this album?
Who's that?
Our favorite music critic, Robert Christgau.
Oh,
this
wow.
Is what he wrote.
What does Bob have to say?
This is what he wrote at the time of its release. Quote, songs that were poorly or were just lame in the first place have more force and rightness on this exemplary live album than in their studio versions. And Here Comes the Night sounds fresher than it did in 1965. In addition, Morrison documents his debt to blues and R&B definitively. You can hear Bobby Bland all over the record, and cover tributes are paid as well to Ray Charles, John Lee Hooker, Sonny Boy Williamson, Muddy Waters, and Sam Cooke. That's it. Chris?
Yeah, probably not an accident that he starts the album with a Bobby Bland cover. Yeah, and so, yeah, this album's incredible because I think that tour was his love letter to soul, R&B, and blues. And this is one of those instances where Van was not playing his music to an appreciative paying audience. He was putting on a goddamn show.
Yeah.
This is one of the few live albums that when I listen to it makes me sincerely wish I had been in the room to experience all this. The closest comparator for at least that kind of experience or feeling is Live at the Apollo by James Brown. And speaking of Brown, what Van is doing here is his take on Brown's soul orchestra concept that like he showed like brilliantly on Live at the Apollo. But here the difference is Van brought a string quartet. Whereas I think Brown had like half a dozen horn players. He only had 2. He had Jack Schroer and he had a trumpet player. And so it's just thrilling because basically, again, what working for Van equaled freedom to do your thing and to express yourself. And so what you end up with is, and to me, the most notable stuff on here is all the blues and souls covers. You've got 2 Sonny Boy Williamson songs, Help Me, which just has a killer guitar solo. This is John Platania, who was his guitarist for a long time. This is him actually being freed up to like jam, which he never really got to do on the albums. And so it's just awesome. And then you've got a really slow burn, almost menacing take on Willie Dixon's I Just Want to Make Love to You. Whole hell of a lot more sensual nuance to it than Bad Company's version. Bad Company is the one that made it famous. And so you get that. And then a really faithful take on Sam Cooke's Bring It On Home to Me, which proved positive that Van could sing his ass off. And that was obviously Sam was a huge influence. Like Solomon Burke was another huge influence on him as a vocalist. And he shows it here. And it's some interesting stuff here. The end of this record is fascinating because like the last three songs, you get a take on Gloria, which is just basically just a clap along experience for the audience. Right. So it's minimalist. There's a few punches from the band, but it's basically the audience clapping along to the guitar riff and Van just being semi-crazed when he's singing. And then that's followed up by an alternately rocking and gentle cover of Caravan. It's got this jaunty tempo and celebratory feel to it, extracting maximum drama. And here, Jack Schroer gets a killer sax solo. And then there's a gorgeous middle section. And this is during which Van introduces the band that gets a really lovely string treatment and a brilliantly little soft trumpet run before, again, it explodes into magnificence. And then it ends with a straightforward blues take on Cypress Avenue. On Cypress Avenue, it had this kind of kaleidoscopic harpsichord, almost like extraterrestrial feel to it. Here, he just plays it straight. And as a straight piano-driven and sax-driven blues song, it works. Boy, does it work. And so again, this is just Van making his origins very clear. So yeah, really exciting album and really essential. What are the essential live records? Live at Leeds, Live at Fillmore East, the Hawkwind live album, For Me Built the Spills live album. There's a few of these. This belongs on that same shelf as an essential part of anybody's collection.
And the final record in this wonderful streak of Van Morrison's, Veedon Fleece from 1974. After his tour to support Hard Nose the Highway, Morrison went on a 3-week vacation in the fall of 1973 throughout the Republic of Ireland, avoiding his home in Belfast due to the political violence going on in Northern Ireland at the time. This was an interesting time in Morrison's life as his career was peaking both commercially and artistically. He had separated from his wife and had a new fiancée, and he was now formally getting in touch with his Irishness. This inspired him to write a fresh batch of songs that ended up being Veedon Fleece, released in late 1974. This is the closest Morrison ever came to producing Astral Weeks Part 2.
Yep.
It shares a lot in common with that classic record. The mesh of soul, jazz, and folk producing that unique Celtic mystic flavor is definitely here. But the music leans more into jazz as opposed to Astral Weeks' general folkiness, especially in tracks like the sashaying ballad Fair Play and the mournful cello-driven Lyndon Arden Stole the Highlights. Streets of Arklow has that meditative Astral Weeks mood, but put through an acoustic blues filter. The nearly 9-minute You Don't Pull No Punches, But You Don't Push the River is a masterwork of jazz-folk fusion, with Morrison passionately diving into stream-of-consciousness lyrics inspired by his actual studies in Gestalt psychotherapy. Bulbs is a country music shuffle that's lit and energized by Morrison's powerful, blue-eyed soul voice. For me, the highlight of the album is Cul-de-sac, a meditation on Irish emigration to America, rendered in such exquisite, slow-burning soul music that it would have made Otis Redding jealous. Morrison started his special 1968-74 period with a masterpiece, and he ended it with another. For me, this is his third perfect album, and this is one of the 3 5-star Van Morrison albums that's on my list of the 500 greatest albums ever. Chris?
Yeah, Veedon Fleece, to me, it's a more pronounced version of the Tale of Two Halves than Streetchoir. And let me explain that. So side A is just amazing. And like you said, it's him going back to that feel and that sort of jazz folk fusion with more emphasis on the jazz, like you said. And that first half is just extraordinary. Like, Fair Play is amazing. It's like the vocals on that are really great, just really passionate, really rich. But it's weird. He's almost Kermity. He's got that little bit of weirdness going on there. but it's beautiful. And then Lyndon Arden stole the highlights, and Who Was That Masked Man? It's just, it's a 2-song suite, and it's really about Van's fascination with rebellious violence, where I think Lyndon Arden it's basically a tale about a guy who gets pissed off and shoots a couple people in a bar. But so there's the first song is The Story, so it's very folky, it's very Irish storytelling-ish, packs a punch. It's a short song, but packs a punch in 2 minutes and 17 seconds. And then you get Who Was That Masked Man, which is a meditation on what he just sang about, where he's just got this awe about this ability to access such violence. And then like Street of Arklow, hey, the pan flute shows up. Got to represent for the Irish. Yeah. So side A is just brilliant. And then Bulbs is a wonderful song. It's really just rousing and definitely the best country song that Van ever pulled off. But it comes out of nowhere. It's like you've got this flow where he's getting you into this meditation and this mood and this extraordinary thing. And now all of a sudden he's like doing like the Van stuff from a few years prior. And it's like, huh? And so it's a really striking curveball. Yeah. And same thing. And then he has a streak. Basically, most of the second half of the record stays in that vibe, cul-de-sac. And then it ends. And then at the end, it goes back to that side A vibe with Country Fair, which is just really lovely. Again, one of those soaking in the memory of one of the memories from that trip and him getting transcendence out of a memory. And it's very Irish. So again, it's a strange listening experience. I stopped short of calling it a masterpiece because of the little bit of curveball. Yeah, like I said, that streak from cul-de-sac until County Fair doesn't work as well for me as it does for you. But yeah, if he had kept going, if like he's got those 6 songs, if he had kept it in that vein, then it would be a stone cold absolute masterpiece. But the shift is just weird there.
Yeah. You know what? Who also loves this album? The late Sinead O'Connor.
Oh, yeah.
In 2007, she spoke about it on a show. I think it was a radio show or a TV show. The Dave Fanning Show. It was a radio program, an Irish radio program. And her quote was, "It's the record I always come back to again and again. It is far superior to Astral Weeks, and I love Astral Weeks. This is the definitive Van album with the definitive Van song, Who Was That Masked Man? It's the most obvious album he's ever done about Ireland. Veedon Fleece is the only thing I listen to just before I go on stage. It's a mind-altering work of art." End quote.
That might say as much about how much of a mental case Sinead was as anything else for her to say it's better than Astral Weeks. But it is a great album. I'll give it that. And also that, I'm probably going to mess up his name, but the dude that was in Red Hot Chili Peppers and is now touring with Pearl Jam, Josh Klinghoffer. Yeah. It's his favorite album, from what I've read, and which is strange because the guy does a poor man's impression of Frusciante and sticks in that wheelhouse. But Veedon Fleece is his favorite album. Okay, a hired guitar mercenary has soul, evidently. But yeah, so again, there we go. And 8, you've got 3 masterpieces, 1 near masterpiece, a couple of really good albums, and one clunker with an awesome live album. So just a wonderful streak. And of course, it was after this, he takes a 3-year break and eventually moves back to Ireland. He had his decade in America, and then he figured it was time to go home. And so he's been there ever since. He hasn't been as essential since, but he's had his moments, and he's revered. He's been a living legend. This was the end of him as a viable first-run artist. After this, he was a legacy act, but one hell of one.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of which,
legacy. He's the greatest white soul singer of all time, and a wonderful songwriter and vocalist, and just overall just stylist who influenced multiple generations of artists and bands.
Yeah,
Bruce
absolutely.
Springsteen, greatly influenced by Van Morrison. Obviously, we just mentioned Sinead O'Connor. U2, Bono has gone on record saying how much Morrison influenced him as a vocalist.
Basically, any white rock singer that fancies himself as a soulful cat was influenced by Van Morrison. David Bowie.
To a certain extent.
In the mid-'70s, when he had his Thin White Duke period. definitely influenced by Van. And then again, when he comes back to Scary Monsters, and there's a lot of Van influence there. Cameron Winter.
Yeah, I mentioned that in a parameter setter. Yes, Geese.
Yeah,
he's a huge Van Morrison fan. So,
which it's so strange to me that everybody's fascinated with Geese because they're like an actual great American rock band that's like that everybody loves, that's universally loved for like the first time in 20 plus years in America. But and everybody wants to play. What are the touch points? Very few of these folks that have written for pay about Geese have mentioned Van. It's actually shocked. More people mention Lou Reed and Leonard Cohen. And of course, he admits that he's a huge Leonard Cohen guy, but they don't talk about Van. And Van is an enormous influence on Getting Killed, especially, and on Winter, especially like I think Winter's impressionistic bent is him doing simultaneous impression of Cohen, Waits, and Morrison.
Yeah.
It's so again, so he marches on as an influence. I have 3 bullet points about his legacy to share. Right. It's that adventurous spirit that he brought, and this sort of this bravado and this sort of vanguard thinking, this energy that was just infectious. And so he had an ability to surround himself with like naturally great musicians, and he gave them the freedom. And a lot of what Van's stuff is follow the leader. It all comes from him, those awesome melodies, that awesome power and all of that. But he gave his folks the ability to explore. And so his ability to do that, and then arrangements, Astral Weeks, just breathtaking. And again, like most artists have tried, a lot of artists have tried to do their version of Astral Weeks. Like even Cameron Winter's solo record, Cancer of the Skull, is his riff on Astral Weeks. And so there's that. So there's the adventurousness of the arrangement. Then there's just the depth of feeling. And this gets at what Lester Banks was saying, that emotional resonance and lyrical impressionism of really exploring the moment and exploring his meditation on memory, and just his ability to capture that in his melody and his vocal performances, in his arrangements, and just the richness of that, and his exploration of the feeling, and his ability to tap into that. A line that I would say about, and I probably have stolen this from somebody, and I've seen riffs on this elsewhere about other artists and maybe about Van, that like Tupelo Honey is the kind of song that God has pre-written, and that Van is one of those rare geniuses that can find it up there in the realm. He can pull it down from heaven and embody it. And so there is such a thing. Obviously, McCartney and Lennon have a bunch of them, and Paul Simon has. So you can say that there's these songs that just exist. They're outside of time and space. Yeah. And then there's those rare geniuses that can access those. Yeah. And Van had that. And then finally, just the voice and the singing. He's just a singularly great singer, and he's a great jazz singer, and his ability to scat and improvise and go on those runs. He's a great blues singer because of the depth of feeling and the growl. He's a terrific pop singer, which he proved with like Brown Eyed Girl and Warm Love and Crazy Love. Like he could do that kind of thing just effortlessly, and just a great folk singer because of the jauntiness and again, depth of feeling and just that voice. And again, I said a lot of, especially whites like Bono, like basically has spent half his career trying to do an impression in his own way of Van. He's got his own style and his own other European-ish influences. But think about like Pride in the Name of Love and With or Without You, or his most soaring stuff. He's basically trying to do his best Van impression on those songs. And so just a hugely influential singer and one of the great voices. And again, his range, where he could do those lilts, he could do Crazy Love, but then he could go Kermit the Frog on Fair Play and get that richness. Yeah, it's just really extraordinary. So yeah, Van, one of the most talented motherfuckers to ever walk the face of the earth.
Yeah, for sure. And it's about time he got his episode, and it's about time some of these modern day music critics get their reference points and start listening to the man. Hopefully you all of you listening will go on, and if you haven't heard these Van Morrison albums, go and listen to them. They're all essential. And this is the streak that made him a legend. This is the set of albums that made him an all-time great.
Yep.
So.
And with that, folks, as we always do at the end of these episodes, we encourage you to join our fabulous Curmudgeonly community. A lot of mirth and merriment to be had there. I've actually contributed a little bit lately. And go up there, Arturo keeps us in great YouTube clips and fosters some pretty good back and forths. And go to facebook.com/group/curmudgeonrock. It's invite only, but we'll let you in unless you're a total goon. Have any thoughts about Van, and do you think he sucks, or are you still mad at him for his COVID era behavior? Let us know. Send us some fan mail, curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And then, as we have been doing for the last couple of years now, we'll put together a special Spotify playlist with Van stuff. I don't know. I may just put all 8 albums on there. What the heck? We'll game the system. We might just put everything up there. So remains to be seen. But you can access that in our episode description from wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple or Stitcher or whatever else. And click on that link and you'll have a soundtrack to enjoy the music as we discuss and riff on it. And as always, folks, as I say, dig it.